The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky with a warm orange glow that made the small town look peaceful and calm. Streets that were usually busy during the day now carried a quiet charm. People were heading home after a long day, the chatter of their voices fading as they went about their evening routines. One man walked down a narrow street, moving steadily but with a sense of purpose. His steps were calm and measured, as if he had all the time in the world and nothing could disturb him. There was a certain quiet strength about him, a presence that made him seem grounded and in control, even though he was alone. Meanwhile, not far from where he walked, a group of bikers roared down the main road. Their engines were loud, echoing off the buildings and breaking the peaceful evening air. They were a familiar sight in the town, known for their aggressive behavior and the way they enjoyed intimidating people. This group in particular had built a reputation for showing off, proving their toughness to anyone who crossed their path. They laughed and shouted among themselves, their voices filled with confidence and pride. Tonight they were looking for someone to challenge, someone to scare, and the lone man walking along the street caught their attention. The bikers slowed down as they approached him, their wheels crunching over the gravel. They exchanged quick glances and smirks, sizing him up. The tallest of the group, a man with a thick beard and a leather jacket that looked like it had seen too many fights, leaned slightly forward and called out, trying to sound intimidating. The others circled around, forming a rough barrier that blocked the path. Their movements were aggressive, calculated to make anyone feel trapped. The man stopped walking but didn't look worried. He simply stood there, his hands relaxed at his sides, his eyes calm but observant. He didn't flinch or step back. The bikers started shouting, trying to provoke him. They used words that were meant to show dominance, to make him feel fear and pressure. Some of the younger members even laughed, thinking the man would be easy to scare. But he didn't respond with anger or fear. Instead, he stood still, his face neutral, his body relaxed but ready. There was something in the way he held himself that was different from everyone else the bikers had confronted before. It was subtle, but it hinted that he was not just an ordinary man. One biker, a shorter man with a wild look in his eyes, stepped closer. He tried to block the man's path with his bike, leaning it slightly as if forcing him to move. He was confident that the man would step aside, that the intimidation would work as it had countless times before. But the man didn't move. He simply looked at the biker with calm eyes, and for a moment it felt like time slowed down. The biker's confidence wavered, though he tried to hide it. The others began to notice, exchanging nervous glances. Something about the man was making them unsure, something they hadn't expected. The tension grew as the bikers continued their taunts. They circled him slowly, revving their engines, trying to create an atmosphere of threat. The man remained still, shifting his weight slightly but never making any sudden movements. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, and didn't try to provoke them. His calmness was like a quiet force that stood in stark contrast to the loud chaos around him. People walking nearby paused to watch. Some instinctively stepped back, sensing the potential for trouble. Others took out their phones, capturing the scene, curious to see what would happen. One of the bikers decided to try a more direct approach. He took a few steps forward, attempting to push the man with his shoulder. The man didn't resist violently. Instead, he shifted his stance just enough to maintain balance and avoid being moved. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it was precise, controlled, and effective. The biker stumbled slightly, surprised at how little effect his effort had. He looked around at his friends, who were starting to realize that the man might not be as easy to intimidate as they thought. The leader of the group, the tall bearded man, stepped forward now, his voice firm and commanding. He shouted at the man, trying to regain control of the situation. He gestured aggressively, his movements sharp and deliberate. The man responded not with words but with a steady gaze, unwavering and calm. The more the bikers tried to force the situation, the more obvious it became that their usual tactics weren't working. Their confidence began to crack, though none of them wanted to admit it yet. As the bikers grew more aggressive, the man's calm demeanor didn't falter. He adjusted his stance slightly, a subtle shift that showed readiness without aggression. It was like watching a storm gathering quietly before the first lightning strikes. The bikers, fueled by arrogance, didn't notice the warning in his movements. They were too focused on showing their dominance, too eager to prove themselves in front of the others. Passers-by continued to gather at a safe distance, murmuring among themselves. The scene was tense, but it was also strangely mesmerizing. Everyone could feel the difference in energy. The bikers were loud, chaotic, and aggressive, while the man exuded control, calmness, and confidence. His presence alone began to change the dynamics of the situation. The air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. People could sense that this encounter would not end the way it usually did with the bikers. The bikers tried to coordinate among themselves, whispering and giving subtle signals. They planned to corner the man, thinking that sheer numbers would force him to react. But each step they took, each attempt to surround him, was met with careful, deliberate movement. The man didn't attack or retaliate. He simply adjusted his balance, positioning, and stance, maintaining control over every small action. One of the younger bikers, eager to show off, attempted a more reckless move. He lunged forward with the intent to scare the man physically. The man reacted with minimal effort, sidestepping smoothly, and the biker stumbled past him. It was not a display of aggression, but of skill and timing. The others froze for a moment, shocked at how effortlessly the man moved. A ripple of doubt passed through the group, but the leader tried to hide it, shouting louder, trying to regain control through sheer noise. For a while, the street was filled with tension, the sounds of engines shouting, and distant murmurs blending together. But amidst it all, the man remained unshaken. His calmness was magnetic, drawing attention and respect even from those who didn't know who he was. The bikers were slowly realizing that their usual methods were not going to work. Every attempt they made was met with subtle but undeniable control, and it began to frustrate them. Their confidence was slipping, replaced by confusion and hesitation. As the evening deepened and the sky turned a darker shade, the man stood alone, the center of attention, calm and unbothered. The bikers, despite their bravado, were now forced to reconsider. They had walked into a situation expecting to dominate and intimidate, but instead, they faced someone who could handle them without aggression. It was a quiet, powerful lesson in control, skill, and presence. The first part of the encounter ended with the man still standing, calm and collected, while the bikers began to understand, even if only subconsciously, that this evening would not go as they had planned. The calm before the storm had set the stage for something none of them would forget. The evening air was cool now, carrying the faint scent of damp asphalt and distant food from a small street stall. The quiet calm of the town had been replaced with a tense energy that seemed to hang over the narrow street like a heavy curtain. The bikers had stopped circling for a moment, muttering among themselves and giving the man cautious looks. They were no longer as confident as before. Something about him, the way he stood, calm yet alert, made them uneasy. The leader's voice grew sharper, trying to command attention, trying to convince his group to act boldly, but his own words seemed to lack the usual conviction. He signaled them to move forward, to show strength, but each biker hesitated, glancing at the man and then at each other. One of the younger bikers, still full of bravado and wanting to prove himself, decided to take the first real step. He shifted his bike slightly to block the man's path and stepped off, approaching with a swagger that was meant to intimidate. The man didn't flinch or move. He simply watched, his eyes calm, taking in every movement and every slight shift in posture. The biker tried to push him, expecting the man to stumble or react nervously, but the man moved only enough to maintain balance. It was precise, almost effortless. The biker stumbled slightly, his confidence faltering as he realized this wasn't going to be simple. His friends laughed nervously, trying to cover their doubt with loud voices, but it only made the tension more visible. The leader, frustrated by the lack of reaction he expected, stepped forward himself. His hands moved in wide gestures, shouting threats and taunts. He wanted to provoke a reaction, to make the man angry or scared so that they could take control of the situation. But the man didn't respond with words, didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. He simply shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his stance subtly, showing readiness without aggression. The leader's confidence wavered for the first time, though he tried hard not to show it. His voice grew louder, sharper, and more impatient, but the calm in front of him refused to break. Another biker, emboldened by seeing the leader take action, stepped forward to help. He lunged, thinking a quick shove or grab would assert control. The man moved just enough to deflect, not with force, but with perfect timing. The biker lost his balance and nearly fell to the ground. His friends gasped, some instinctively stepping back, unsure of what to do next. There was a moment of stunned silence, broken only by the low hum of engines and the distant chatter of bystanders. People who had been watching began to murmur, some moving closer for a better view, while others stayed at a safe distance, sensing the danger that could unfold. The leader realized something crucial in that moment. This man was no ordinary person. Every movement he made was controlled, precise, and deliberate. The smallest adjustments in his stance or balance spoke volumes. It was as if the man was ready for any challenge, anticipating each move with ease. The leader's mind raced, trying to calculate how to regain control. He barked orders at his group, urging them to surround the man, but hesitation had already crept into their minds. The younger bikers exchanged nervous glances, realizing that brute force alone might not win this encounter. A third biker, the quietest in the group but known for impulsive actions, stepped forward suddenly. He wanted to end the standoff quickly. He lunged toward the man with a raised fist, expecting a reaction, but the man's movement was too fast and smooth. He sidestepped, letting the biker's momentum carry him slightly off balance. It was not a harsh reaction, not a strike meant to hurt, but it sent a clear message. The biker stumbled and nearly collided with the leader. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. He looked around at the man, searching for an explanation, but could only see calm focus. The bikers regrouped, now cautious. Their arrogance had begun to fade under the weight of the man's composure. They tried whispering to each other, planning their next move, but uncertainty was creeping in. The man didn't need to threaten them with words. His presence alone demanded attention. Every step, every shift in his weight was a reminder that he was prepared for any aggression. The bikers, who had walked in full of confidence, were now unsure if they could handle what they had started. The street had grown even quieter, except for the occasional sound of engines and distant voices. The onlookers held their breath, sensing that something important was about to happen. The man remained calm, his eyes scanning the bikers without hostility yet filled with awareness. There was no anger, no aggression, only readiness. It was a subtle but powerful message. Do not underestimate him. The bikers, now more aware than ever, realized they had misjudged the situation. The leader decided to try one more approach. He raised his hands in a gesture meant to show dominance and stepped closer, his voice louder than before. He shouted insults and challenges, hoping to provoke an emotional reaction that he could then exploit. But the man stayed steady. His calm gaze met the leader's with unwavering confidence. It was almost as if he were saying without words that he was prepared for anything, that he was not intimidated, and that he could handle whatever came next. One biker, feeling desperate to assert himself, decided to escalate the situation physically. He lunged forward quickly, attempting to grab the man by the arm. The man reacted instinctively, not with force but with perfect timing. He shifted his body just enough to avoid the grip, using the biker's momentum against him. The biker stumbled, flailing slightly, and had to regain his balance. The others watched in shock, realizing that their attacks were not only ineffective but also made them appear clumsy and uncoordinated in comparison. Confidence turned into doubt, and hesitation spread through the group. The leader noticed the growing uncertainty in his gang and tried to maintain authority. He shouted orders, trying to regain control, but the group's confidence had already been shaken. The younger members were hesitant, their bravado fading as they began to recognize that they had underestimated the man. His calm presence, his controlled movements, and his focused gaze were not just intimidating, they were a reminder of skill, discipline, and experience. This was not someone they could dominate through noise, numbers, or aggression. The man made no move to attack. He didn't need to. His composure alone was enough to unsettle the bikers. He adjusted his stance slightly, a subtle demonstration of readiness but without hostility. The message was clear. Any aggressive action against him would be met with precision and skill, not uncontrolled rage. This realization began to spread among the bikers, a creeping fear that made them second-guess every move. The air was thick with tension, a mix of anticipation and fear, and the bystanders could feel it too. The street seemed to shrink around them, the attention focused entirely on the man and the bikers. Every whisper, every movement carried weight. The leader finally called for the bikers to regroup, realizing that rushing into another attack could be disastrous. But the damage was done. Their earlier confidence had been replaced with caution and unease. Each biker understood on some level that they were facing someone they could not easily intimidate or overpower. They hesitated, unsure how to proceed without making a mistake that could end badly. The man's calmness remained unbroken. He didn't press the advantage. He didn't show anger or aggression. He simply stood, composed and aware, demonstrating control through presence rather than force. The bikers were now forced to acknowledge, internally if not openly, that they had underestimated him. His skill, his poise, and his quiet confidence had turned what they expected to be a routine intimidation into a situation they could not predict or control. Time seemed to stretch as the bikers weighed their next move. The leader tried to maintain authority, but even he could feel the shift in power. Their usual methods of intimidation were failing, and the man's readiness made any attack risky. The group started stepping back slightly, their posture less aggressive, their eyes more cautious. The energy on the street had changed. The confrontation had escalated not through violence, but through the quiet display of expertise and control. Bystanders continued to watch, fascinated by the unfolding scene. Some whispered, speculating about who the man might be and why he was so calm under pressure. Others simply observed, appreciating the rare display of composure in the face of obvious intimidation. The man, standing in the middle of the street, had captured everyone's attention without raising his voice, without acting aggressively, simply by being fully aware and in control. As the night grew darker, the tension on the street reached a new level. The bikers, who had come expecting an easy confrontation, were now unsure and cautious. The man remained still, his focus unwavering, his presence commanding respect. Every subtle movement he made reinforced the lesson that arrogance and aggression alone were no match for skill, discipline, and awareness. The confrontation had escalated, not through anger or force, but through a quiet, undeniable expertise that left the bikers hesitant and unsettled, setting the stage for the next phase of the encounter. The night had fully settled over the town, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. The street, once quiet and empty, now held a tense energy that made it feel alive with anticipation. The bikers stood in a loose formation, their bravado fading with each passing moment. They had started the confrontation full of confidence, expecting to scare a lone man, but now the reality of the situation was beginning to hit them. The man had moved with a calm precision, avoiding every push and shove, and his presence alone had disrupted the entire dynamic. One of the bikers, who had been the most aggressive at the start, stepped back, his breathing slightly heavier than before. He rubbed his arm where he had tried to grab the man and failed, and a flicker of doubt crossed his face. For the first time, he realized that this man was not ordinary. The way he had shifted his weight, adjusted his stance, and avoided confrontation without panic spoke of experience and training. The group, who had relied on sheer numbers and intimidation, was now beginning to feel vulnerable. The leader of the bikers, noticing the hesitation spreading among his group, tried to assert control. He shouted instructions, moving aggressively, attempting to provoke a reaction, but the man remained calm, his gaze unwavering. There was no panic, no fear, only quiet readiness. The leader felt a strange unease, a crack in his own confidence that he had never felt before. He had confronted many people, but none had made him feel this cautious. Another biker, the one known for reckless moves, stepped forward suddenly, thinking he could catch the man off guard. He lunged toward the man with a raised fist, expecting resistance or fear, but the man moved just enough to avoid the strike. It wasn't an attack in return, but a redirection that used the biker's own momentum. The biker stumbled past him off balance, and the others watched in disbelief. Whispered comments of surprise passed among them. Some of the bystanders even gasped quietly, sensing the skill displayed in such a subtle movement. The man did not smile or show satisfaction. He stayed composed, watching the bikers with an awareness that seemed to take in every tiny detail. His eyes followed each subtle shift in their posture, each nervous glance, and even the tiniest hesitation. It was clear that he was analyzing them, predicting their next move, ready to react if necessary. The bikers, on the other hand, had no such control. Their arrogance had been replaced by caution and a growing fear of misjudging him. One of the bikers whispered to another, his voice low and nervous. "Who is this guy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer in his gut. This man wasn't just skilled. He was disciplined, precise, and in control. Every instinct told them that trying to dominate him physically could result in humiliation or worse. The leader, hearing this whisper, frowned but couldn't respond immediately. His usual confidence was slipping as he realized that their assumptions were wrong. They had walked into the encounter believing they would easily scare someone, but instead, they faced someone who seemed untouchable in his composure and skill. The man's presence alone was enough to command attention. He didn't need to raise his voice or threaten with gestures. His calmness, his ability to maintain balance, and his readiness to respond without aggression created an invisible barrier that the bikers could sense. Their previous bravado began to crumble. Hesitation replaced aggression, and the more they tried to think of their next move, the more they realized that they were outmatched not with brute strength, but with control and skill. The leader took a step back, signaling his group to slow down. He knew that rushing in now could lead to mistakes. The bikers started forming a tentative circle around him, but it was clear that their earlier confidence had eroded. Each of them kept a slight distance, careful not to make sudden moves. The man's quiet confidence had forced them to acknowledge, at least subconsciously, that they were dealing with someone highly trained, someone who could defend himself without needing to attack. A younger biker, trying to regain some pride, took a small step forward. He raised his hand slightly as if to intimidate or test the man's reactions. The man responded with a small shift of his weight, enough to make it clear that any aggressive action would be met with precision. The biker hesitated mid-step, realizing that his move had already been noticed and neutralized. His confidence faltered and he instinctively stepped back, unsure of what to do next. The others noticed, and a silent understanding passed among the group. They were no longer in control. The bystanders continued to watch, now leaning slightly forward, captivated by the unfolding scene. The street had become a stage, the tension between the man and the bikers holding everyone's attention. People whispered among themselves, speculating about who he might be, why he was so composed, and how he could move with such confidence. Some admired him silently, understanding the courage it took to face intimidation without aggression. Others felt a sense of relief, realizing that the situation was being handled without escalation into violence. The leader finally spoke again, his voice trying to regain authority. He gestured aggressively, shouting instructions, attempting to provoke fear or frustration. But the man's calm gaze never wavered. His body language conveyed awareness, readiness, and control. It was as if he were silently saying, "I am prepared for anything you do, but I am not here to harm unless necessary." The bikers felt the weight of this message deeply. Their arrogance, which had driven them to act recklessly, now felt dangerous. They realized that they had underestimated someone who could easily handle their aggression with skill and composure. The man adjusted his stance slightly, a small but deliberate movement. It wasn't a threat, but a signal that he was aware of everything happening around him. The bikers, now more cautious than ever, began to sense that they were out of their depth. Their previous tactics of intimidation and physical pressure were ineffective. Every move they made was anticipated or avoided effortlessly. The realization hit them. They had chosen the wrong target, someone whose experience and expertise far exceeded their expectations. A second biker, who had been quietly observing, whispered to a friend, "He's a professional, isn't he?" The words hung in the air, filled with awe and fear. They didn't need to see a fight to know the truth. The subtle control and precision in his movements were proof enough. The leader's jaw tightened as he heard this, knowing that admitting it openly would show weakness, but understanding it fully in his mind. They had walked into a confrontation thinking they could dominate, and now they faced a reality that threatened their pride and reputation. The man's calmness remained a powerful force. He did not need to act aggressively. His presence, his awareness, and the way he maintained control over his body and reactions created a natural barrier that the bikers could not penetrate. Every small attempt at intimidation or physical action was met with subtle, controlled responses that neutralized their aggression without escalating violence. The bikers felt frustration, confusion, and fear, all mixed together in a way they had never experienced before. The leader tried once more to command the group, gesturing and shouting, but the bikers were no longer as responsive. They exchanged glances, each realizing that their usual tactics were ineffective. Their confidence had been replaced by caution and doubt. The man had demonstrated a level of skill and composure that demanded respect, even without throwing a single punch or showing hostility. The encounter had shifted from a display of intimidation to a silent lesson in expertise and control. The bikers' hesitation grew as they considered their next move. They had underestimated the man completely, assuming that their aggression and numbers would be enough to dominate him. But every step, every shift in his stance, every calm gaze told them otherwise. The man was not just prepared. He was ready, experienced, and fully in control. The realization sank in slowly, filling the bikers with a sense of unease. The arrogance that had driven them here was now a source of vulnerability. Bystanders watched with bated breath, some whispering about the man's abilities, others simply observing the remarkable calm he exhibited. It was clear that he was skilled, disciplined, and aware of every detail in the situation. The bikers, meanwhile, felt the weight of their mistake. They had picked a fight with someone far more capable than they had imagined. Each of them sensed that their next actions could have serious consequences if they were not careful. The street was quiet except for the low hum of engines and distant sounds of the town settling into the night. The man's calmness had shifted the energy of the encounter completely. The bikers, who had begun with arrogance and confidence, were now cautious and uncertain. They realized that they had misjudged the situation and that their aggression could easily backfire if they acted without thinking. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of respect, fear, and awe, all directed at the man who had turned a simple intimidation attempt into a demonstration of expertise. The leader finally called for his group to regroup, signaling that they needed to reconsider their approach. The bikers reluctantly complied, their posture less aggressive, their movements careful and measured. They knew, without a doubt, that they were dealing with someone who could easily counter any rash move. The man remained in place, calm and composed, observing them with quiet awareness. He didn't need to act. The awareness and control he displayed were enough to communicate that any aggression against him would be unwise. As the night deepened, the man's composure and the biker's growing realization created a powerful scene. The confrontation had escalated through observation and presence, rather than through physical violence. The bikers were forced to acknowledge, at least internally, that they had underestimated someone who was skilled, disciplined, and ready for any challenge. The encounter had shifted from one of arrogance and intimidation to one of respect and caution, leaving everyone on the street, including the bysta. The street was silent now, except for the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional whisper of the wind. The bikers, who had arrived with loud engines and bold intentions, were now subdued, their earlier arrogance replaced by unease. They were still in the street, circling cautiously, but their movements were slower, more measured. Each of them understood, in some part of their mind, that the man they had targeted was far more capable than they had anticipated. His calm presence had shifted the energy completely. The air was thick with tension, not aggression, as everyone seemed to hold their breath in anticipation of what might happen next. The man remained in the center, his posture relaxed but controlled. He didn't speak, didn't shout, and didn't make any sudden moves. His gaze was steady, scanning the bikers carefully, noting every twitch of muscle, every flicker of hesitation. The bikers were no longer sure who was in control. Each attempt to provoke him had failed, and their frustration was starting to show. One of the younger bikers, trying to regain some pride, stepped forward with an awkward lunge, hoping to intimidate him physically. But the man shifted his weight ever so slightly, letting the biker's momentum carry him past without harm. The biker stumbled, regaining his balance with a nervous laugh, and the others began to see the man's skill in action. Another biker, still eager to prove himself, tried a more aggressive approach. He raised his hand and stepped forward quickly, attempting to strike. But the man moved with perfect timing, sidestepping without effort and allowing the biker's momentum to carry him slightly off balance. The biker stumbled and had to steady himself, a flush of embarrassment crossing his face. The onlookers, who had been watching with growing interest, murmured quietly, some expressing amazement at the ease with which the man neutralized the threat. The biker's expressions changed as well. The first signs of fear were visible, mixed with frustration and disbelief. The leader barked orders, attempting to regain some control, but his voice lacked its usual authority. The bikers were hesitant, unsure of what action to take next. They had underestimated the man, and each failed attempt only reinforced their unease. The man remained calm, standing his ground, his presence alone neutralizing their aggression. His movements were deliberate and precise, conveying a quiet warning without a single aggressive gesture. The bikers began to understand that their next move could easily backfire if they acted without caution. One of the bikers tried a different tactic. He attempted to circle around the man, thinking he could catch him off guard from a different angle, but the man's awareness was complete. He shifted just enough to maintain a balanced position, and the biker's attempt was met with a subtle but effective counterbalance. It was not a strike, not a display of anger, but a controlled movement that demonstrated his ability to neutralize threats with ease. The biker froze, realizing that he was no match in this situation. The leader's face tightened as he saw the growing hesitation in his group. Their confidence had eroded, replaced with caution and respect. The man's calm demeanor had become a barrier the bikers could not penetrate. Each small movement, each adjustment in his stance conveyed skill and readiness without aggression. He didn't need to fight aggressively to prove his ability. His mere presence and composure were enough to command attention. The bikers, who had initially approached with loud confidence, now found themselves second-guessing every step. Their arrogance had begun to backfire, and they were forced to consider retreat or at least a more cautious approach. The leader, sensing that the situation was slipping out of control, called for a pause. He signaled to his group to step back slightly and reassess. The bikers complied, their movements slower, their postures less aggressive. They began to whisper among themselves, the bravado of earlier moments replaced by uncertainty. The man standing calmly in the center observed them silently. He did not need to speak or act. The simple act of maintaining control over himself and his movements was enough to shift the power dynamic. A younger biker, still hoping to redeem himself, made a clumsy attempt to provoke a reaction. He took a step forward and jabbed his hand slightly toward the man, expecting a quick confrontation. But the man's response was smooth and effortless. He shifted his stance, allowing the biker's hand to pass harmlessly, and the biker stumbled forward slightly. The impact was minor, but the message was clear. The man's skill and awareness made any aggressive move risky. The group of bikers began to murmur, exchanging looks that reflected growing unease. They realized finally that their plan to intimidate had not only failed but had placed them in a situation where their overconfidence could lead to embarrassment or worse. The bystanders, who had been watching quietly, now began to whisper among themselves, some expressing admiration, others a mixture of relief and awe. The scene had transformed from a potential street confrontation into a demonstration of expertise and control. The man had handled the aggression with calm precision, neutralizing threats without escalating violence. The bikers, who had relied on intimidation and physical pressure, were now hesitant, their earlier energy replaced with caution. The leader's attempts to regain authority were becoming less effective. Each order he gave was met with hesitation or slow compliance. His own confidence was wavering as he saw the skill and control displayed by the man. Every small movement by the man reinforced the lesson that skill, awareness, and composure could outmatch brute force and aggression. The bikers were beginning to feel the consequences of underestimating him, and it showed in their body language. They shifted uneasily, their earlier swagger replaced with uncertainty. The man remained composed, adjusting his stance subtly as the bikers moved. His readiness was evident in every gesture, every slight shift in weight, and every controlled movement. It was not aggression, but a display of preparedness that left the bikers hesitant. They realized that any rash action could be met with skillful responses that they were unprepared to handle. The leader, sensing the growing fear and uncertainty among his group, signaled for a temporary retreat. The bikers took a step back, their confidence shaken, as the man remained in place, calm and unthreatened. The street had become a stage for a silent lesson in expertise. The man had turned the bikers' aggression back on them, not with violence but with awareness and composure. Each attempt to challenge him had been met with control, every aggressive move carefully neutralized. The bikers were forced to confront the reality of their overconfidence. Their arrogance had backfired, leaving them cautious and uncertain. They began to understand, if only instinctively, that the man was capable of handling far more than they could throw at him. One of the bikers whispered to a friend, his voice low and shaky, "We messed up. He's too skilled." The words were barely audible, but they carried the weight of realization. The leader's jaw tightened as he processed the same thought internally. They had underestimated the man, and their attempts to assert dominance had only highlighted their vulnerability. The crowd of bystanders watched in silence, sensing the shift in energy. The confrontation had changed entirely. What had begun as an attempt to intimidate had evolved into a demonstration of calm, controlled expertise that commanded respect without a single aggressive word. The leader finally signaled for the bikers to move back completely, giving the man space and acknowledging, at least temporarily, that they were outmatched. The bikers complied, their movements careful, measured, and filled with a new respect for the man who had handled them so effortlessly. The man did not chase them or display anger. He remained in the center, calm and steady, observing them without threat. The lesson was clear. Arrogance without skill and awareness could easily backfire. While quiet expertise commanded respect naturally, the bystanders, now more relaxed, whispered among themselves, impressed by what they had witnessed. The man's calm and controlled handling of the bikers had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a moment of awe and admiration. The bikers, once confident and loud, were now subdued, humbled by the quiet power displayed in front of them. They had come to assert dominance but were instead forced to recognize skill, composure, and the consequences of their overconfidence. As the night deepened, the bikers slowly moved away, their heads low, avoiding further provocation. The man remained in place, calm and composed, having handled the situation without aggression but with complete control. The street had returned to its quiet state, but the memory of the confrontation lingered. The lesson was clear to everyone who had witnessed it. Expertise, awareness, and calm confidence could neutralize arrogance and aggression more effectively than force ever could. The night had fully settled over the town, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. The bikers, who had come with loud engines and boisterous confidence, were now retreating, humbled by the encounter they had just experienced. Their arrogance, once so visible in every step, had been replaced with caution, confusion, and a newfound respect for the man who had stood calmly in the middle of the street, unmoved by their aggression. The lesson was clear. Skill, awareness, and calm composure could counter arrogance and aggression in a way that brute force never could. The man remained standing, his posture relaxed but alert, his gaze sweeping the street to ensure there was no lingering threat. He did not move to follow the bikers, nor did he display any triumph or anger. He simply stood embodying calm authority. Passers-by who had been watching from a distance now began to approach, curiosity and admiration evident in their expressions. Some whispered softly to each other, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. The man's presence alone had commanded respect without the need for violence, and people could sense it clearly. A small group of onlookers gathered near the street corner, speaking quietly among themselves. "Did you see that?" one whispered. "He didn't even have to hit anyone, and they backed off." Another nodded in agreement. "It's like he didn't even need to fight. Just the way he stood there, calm and ready, made them hesitate." Their conversation reflected a mixture of awe and relief. They realized that the encounter could have turned violent if not handled with such precise calmness, but it had ended without harm, teaching a subtle yet powerful lesson about composure and expertise.